Stacey has to be out of here by about 9 p.m., so we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank you all for your patience. Hi, yeah, thank you. Thank you all for your patience as we're getting everything set up. I appreciate all of that. First, Athens, I just want to say I'm so proud of that last election we had. Thank you, and please let's everybody do that again in November. So, good evening. My name is Rachel. I am the events director at Avid Bookshop, and on behalf of all of us at Avid, I just want to thank you so very much for being here tonight. I know you're here for Stacey, so I'm going to try to make this as brief as possible. I would first like to thank the 40 Watt for always being wonderful, gracious hosts. I want to give a huge thank you and shout out to Athens for Everyone. Athens for Everyone helped Avid raise some funds to donate tickets and books for tonight's event, and we couldn't have done it without them. Athens would be a very different place if we didn't have their help with our humanitarian efforts. So please, they are tabling tonight in the back. Please go talk to them, donate, volunteer with them. They have t-shirts for sale. They're wonderful t-shirts. So please do everything you can to help them. So the rundown for tonight, Stacey will speak a little bit about her book and then devote most of the time to audience questions. You can line up right here behind the mic and ask her questions. Afterwards, she will sign books and take photos. Please have your phones at the ready if you want to take a photo with Stacey. If you have purchased a copy of the book from Avid Bookshop, you can get to the front of the signing line. If you have not purchased a copy of the book just yet, we are selling books in the back, and trust me, you want a copy of this book. So I don't have to tell you how monumental Stacey's win was a few weeks ago, but tonight is much more than just her candidacy. Tonight, I'd like for us to honor the path that she has forged to get where she is today. Stacey Abrams has won national recognition for her work to register voters of color in Georgia and build democratic power in the state, as well as her programs to recruit, train, and hire young people of color. As the former House Democratic leader and current candidate for governor, she has been endorsed by Emily's List and civil rights legend Congressman John Lewis. As an entrepreneur, Abrams has helped small businesses create and save thousands of jobs. Abrams is the 2012 recipient of the John F. Kennedy New Frontier Award and has been hailed by the New York Times as one of its 14 young Democrats to watch. Yeah. Stacey Abrams is the change we need, and if we do right by her, she's the leader we deserve. Athens, please give your warmest welcome for your future governor. Yeah.
For my first song, you really don't want to do that. My sister says I have a guitar voice. If the lights were a little lower and you were a little drunker, it would work. But no. I want to say thank you to Barry, to Janet, to Rachel, to all the people who are still trying to come inside. My God, there are a lot of you. Thank you. And thank you for May 22nd. That was kind of cool too. Thank you. And also to Carrie and Olivia who brought the books back there for me to sign. Hi guys, my name is Stacey Abrams and I wrote a book. So I was sitting back there thinking about how to start this off. I've done this a few times. My first set of writings, actually, before I became a memoirist. I'm not sure what this book is exactly, what category it fits into, but I wrote romantic suspense for several years. Selena Montgomery, available at a bookstore near you. And talking about a romance novel is very, very different because everything in it is made up. I have perfect heroes, amazing heroines, the good always wins, the bad is always put in prison, which is where my first boyfriend ended up in that book. But I was thinking about why this book means so much to me, why writing Minority Leader was so important. I was talking to a young man named Hamilton who writes for the Red and Black, and he asked me, why did I write this book? And I said, I've been giving speeches across the country and around Georgia for years, talking about the role I played as minority leader, the role I played as an entrepreneur, the work I did as a writer. And people kept asking two questions, like, how did you do it, and how can I do it? And I figured, hey, might as well write it down. And thus, Minority Leader was born, because we're in a moment in time where understanding good leadership is not only essential, it is urgent. And we are in a moment where so many of us have forgotten our agency. We have forgotten this is our country, and it is our right to have power. And we've forgotten that on a number of levels, not just the occupant of the White House, but it's also in our daily lives. We have become inured to sometimes the challenges that leadership requires, that because we don't look like what leadership is expected to look like, because we don't sound like it, we're not from the right place, we don't love the right person, we've created this space where we've forgotten this is us, and this is ours. And all of us have the right to power. And so I wrote this book because I want to create a cult of power. I want all of you to go out as minions and take over everything. That is the plan. And I don't tell the story in the book, but I was thinking about when I first started to understand why leadership matters, why power matters. And, there's the fact that I grew up in working class poverty in Mississippi. My mom and dad are both from Hattiesburg, Mississippi, a little bit north of where I grew up. My mom and dad grew up in that abject poverty you read about in Mississippi. My dad likes to say he's from the wrong side of the tracks, and my mom's from the wrong side of the tracks. And my parents, clawed their way out. They did all the things they were supposed to. My mom is one of 7 children. She's the only one to finish high school. My dad is the first man in his family to go to college, which is a miracle because my father has dyslexia, which no one understood in the 1950s in Mississippi, and became the first man in his family to go to college. They went to college together, and then my mom, who was smarter, got a graduate degree. My dad will say that too. She got a graduate degree in library science in Wisconsin. So yes, I grew up loving books. I literally used to sleep in the stacks because we couldn't afford a babysitter. But my mom was a college librarian. She got a good job at a college. But the problem was when we moved back to Mississippi, when my mom took that job at the college, she made less money than the janitor who cleaned the college. My dad had a different challenge. Even though he had a college degree from one of Mississippi's best colleges, my father was told he wasn't smart enough to have an office job because he was dyslexic. And so he became a shipyard worker, which is noble work, and I don't disparage it. But my dad was told that he wasn't sufficient. And so even though they did all the things you're told to do, my parents found themselves right back where they started, a little further ahead. They went up the ladder a couple of rungs, but not nearly where you're supposed to go when you have a master's degree from the University of Wisconsin. Not where you're supposed to be when you work full-time every single day. And then they decided to compound the problem by having 6 children. Because apparently they like being poor. But, sorry, that was just in my head. But my mom referred to it, she used to call it we called us the genteel poor. She said, look, we had no money, but we watched PBS and we read books. And so that was enough for her. And I would wonder about the way we lived our lives, because my parents made us go to church, they made us go to school, but they also made us serve. They made us wake up on Saturdays and go out and do service projects. We would go to soup kitchens and homeless shelters, and we would say to them, you guys do know we're poor too, right? Like, while we're serving food to others, we don't have lights. And the water got cut off last week, which my mother called urban camping. My mom had a lot of terms of art for poor. But what they would tell us, my dad's very succinct way of saying it was, look, having nothing is not an excuse for doing nothing. And that rolled around in my head for most of my life. My mom more eloquently said, no matter how little we have, there is someone with less. Your job is to serve that person. But embedded in that notion of service was a question of why service was necessary. Why were so many people impoverished in the state of Mississippi? Why did my parents, who had so little, know that it was their job to wake their children up to take us to go and serve, to go to soup kitchens and homeless shelters, to juvenile justice facilities? Why did they make us do that? And why was it so compelling to them for that to happen? And I understood the latter answer. For them, it was about the right thing to do. But for me, it was remarkably inefficient. I'm like, there are only 8 of us. We cannot fix Mississippi. And I don't want to ruin the end of the story for you, Mom and Dad, but we're not going to do this by ourselves. And so, plus I was missing some of you don't remember this, but I grew up in a time where you only had one channel. We had ABC. And yeah, thank you. And cartoons only came on from 7 a.m. to noon on Saturdays. And I loved the Super Friends. And unfortunately, my parents loved service, and so I had to sacrifice the Super Friends. And that caused me great angst, and I was trying to figure out whose job was it to make sure I could watch the Super Friends, which was a bit churlish as a child, but it was a very big deal for me. And my parents called that government. They were like, look, it's, we have this thing called government. It's supposed to help, and nonprofits help, but sometimes these systems don't work. And so I became fascinated with systems. I wanted to know what system was denying me the right to see Wonder Twin powers activated. That was incredibly important. And thus I discovered that I needed to go into public policy. A few years later, when I was about 13 or 14, my dad, who had worked his way up from a shipyard worker, he was now building ships, naval ships at the shipyard where he worked. My dad fell off a scaffolding. And he broke his arms, his legs, his back. And they told him that in order to collect his workers' comp, he would have to undergo experimental surgery that no one in the state of Mississippi had ever performed. And my dad, who knew that he had a wife and 6 children who depended on him, said that he wouldn't do it. He refused. And they cut off his workers' comp. And that was the second moment I started to understand power. Because I watched my father, this vital man who, for my entire life, had never not worked, who was suddenly relegated first to a hospital bed and then to unemployment, and finally when he was able to first get a job again, he delivered pizzas, which is a good thing, and I learned to love Pizza Hut. But my father was told his agency no longer existed because somebody somewhere decided that his fate rested in their hands. And in a great story, I would say that was the moment I decided I would become governor of Georgia, but no. But that was the moment I decided no one would ever have that much power over my life. That they could tell me, they could tell my parents that for the next 6 years they would struggle because someone said that because they would make a terrible choice, they weren't entitled to the resources that they put in. That sense of power is why I'm here. That question of leadership is why I wrote that book. Because not everyone has the story of my dad. Not everyone has the story of my mom or has my story, but all of us have encountered moments when someone tried to strip us of our power. Or worse, when they told us we didn't deserve it. And that could be at your job when you raise your hand to make a comment. And there's some women in here who will recognize this, where you've made the suggestion and then some guy behind you says it exactly the same way and people clap. And you're like, wait, I just said that. Or you are, going to, you're doing work, you're volunteering, and someone who knows less than you gets more than you because they don't look like you. And it's different for every community, it's different for every person, but the common thread is that we all are entitled to leadership. We're all entitled to ownership of our power. And what I wanted to do was write a book about how we can make that happen. And I've done a little bit myself and have been a bit successful, so I figured, hey, now it's time to write it. And so I started with the title Minority Leader. And there are those who have taken exception to it, saying that they're not a minority. I'm like, if you're not in charge, yeah, you are. There are normative senses of power, and being an outsider is not just endemic to race or class or gender. It can be your faith, it can be your sexual orientation, it can be your economic background, it can be your neighborhood, but we all find ourselves in spaces where we are not expected to have power, and in fact, we're begrudged access to that power. And this book is for you. And if you don't fit into any of those categories, you should be up here. Because the reality is all of us are going to find ourselves on the outside. All of us are going to find ourselves in need of support that we can only cultivate if we can get enough folks to stand with us to change systems. And the way we do that, the way we create that change is by understanding for ourselves what change looks like. I opened the book by talking about my application for a Rhodes Scholarship. I applied for the scholarship in 1991 as a college senior and had no interest in applying for it because I had no interest in failing. But I was encouraged to do it because no black woman had ever won a Rhodes Scholarship nomination, and not even been the finalist for Mississippi. I don't know that that sounds familiar to anyone in this room. It's a little bit of a pattern in my life. But I didn't want to do it because I didn't know anyone who'd ever won a Rhodes Scholarship, and I didn't believe I would ever have it. And for me, that moment was about not doing something I knew I couldn't do, because not trying felt a lot safer than failing. And for a lot of us, that not trying becomes every single day, because failure seems so big and so unwieldy and so permanent that we'd rather just stand still than risk running and falling. But my mom and dad and the folks at Spelman College were really compelling, and I got tired of saying no, and finally I applied. I won't tell you the end of the story. You have to read the book. But I will say this. It has a surprising plot twist. I did become the nominee from the state of Mississippi. I did become the first black woman to make it through that phalanx of terrible questions about things I knew nothing about, proving my intelligence to about 5 people who may or may not have actually believed it to be true, but I got them. And I got that first, I passed through that first phase. And in the process of doing that, I realized for myself that it wasn't that bad, that the trying was invigorating, and it meant something to me. It meant something to sit in this room with people who looked nothing like me, who for so many years didn't believe someone who looked like me could have this thing, and convince them in that moment that, yeah, you should take a risk. And what I took from that, what I've used that moment for, is to think about ambition. And that's the first chapter of the book. I talk about ambition, about having the capacity to dare to dream. Because what power is really grounded in is wanting something. And we often think about, here's the thing I want, and here's how I'm going to get it, but we forget the middle part, which is, why do I want it? And a lot of dreams falter because we never ask that second question. We go from, I want to be a superstar, to I'm going to become a superstar. And we never figure out the middle spaces, the middle passage. And one of the things I realized in the process of applying for the Rhodes, and the process of running for governor, and the process of becoming minority leader, and failing to date effectively, is that, that ambition requires more than just dream. You have to know what you want, but you also have to know why you want it. And we often miss that step, and then we spend a lot of time in regret. Because if we don't know why we want it, then we don't know that we necessarily need to have it. And there are things I've wanted until I really sat down and thought about it, and I was like, I don't really want that. What I want is not the job, I want the title. Or, I just like him because he's cute, not that he's actually a good person. And whether it's a big ambition for your life or a small ambition for your love, it's all the same thing, because if we don't understand why we want it, we are destined to fail at it. And the failure may take a while, but we're not going to get everything we need. And so the first responsibility of leadership, of gaining power, is understanding your ambition. But the other challenge is not editing your ambition. Because for a lot of us, we want things. We think about the things we want, people we want to be, the work we want to accomplish, and then we start to tell ourselves why we can't have it. And that self-editing starts to become automatic. And suddenly you find that instead of running for this thing you wanted or applying for that job you wanted, you're in the same space for the 30 years wondering why it didn't happen. And it's not because anyone told you no. It's because you told yourself no. It's because you started to edit your dreams before anyone could tell you no, because you didn't want to hear them tell you why you couldn't have it. And so it's not only about being willing to articulate what you want, but it's also about being willing to have the broadest set of wants possible. I mean, when I decided to run for this office of governor, literally no one who looks like me has ever had that job. I'm not sure that's a good thing, but thanks for clapping. But I know why you clap, because it's a moment. It's a moment of history that I'm proud to stand in the space and own. But the reality is, when I first started talking about this, I called friends, people I've known for decades. I called them back in May of 2017 and said, I'm exploring a bid for governor. And part of the challenge, the hardest part of this campaign, also being told that, I'm a horrible human, but the other hard part was having people who've known me my entire life tell me, I think you're wonderful, but you're a black woman. It's like they were telling me a secret. I'm like, dude, I have a mirror. I've been a black woman for a really long time. I am very good at it. But there's this moment where people feel compelled to tell you why what you want is insufficient, or worse, why it's not attainable. And that's the other challenge of ambition. Because ambition has to push you past that moment and past that person. If you're not going to have it, you be the reason you don't have it. You be the decider. One of the only good things I will ever quote from George Bush. But you let yourself be the person who says no, or says yes, or says not now, or says right this instant. But part of ambition, part of daring to dream, is giving yourself the space to get past all the people who tell you you can't have it. Ambition is fantastic, and I have a whole section about how you figure it out, what you want to do. But the next part of ambition is fear, because fear is real. You are not paranoid, they are after you. and part of the fear is fear of stereotype, there's fear of achievement, there's fear of failure. And the reality is, my position is this: fear is real, so let's just make it your friend. Invite it in, give it some tea, have scones together. But talk about what the fear is, because part of why fear is so compelling is that it seems so ominous and it's so paralytic that we forget that we can move past it. Because it's not to say that you can fight fear, you can beat it, but if you know what it is, at least you know what you're trying to defeat. But too often we let fear just grow over ambition, and it starts to encompass everything. And when someone says, why are you upset, why are you anxious, why are you worried, you can't really put your finger on it. But the moment you can't put your finger on it, you're usually walking away from whatever it is you thought you wanted. And part of leadership, part of power, is engaging fear, holding it close, knowing what it is, deconstructing it. Because if you can tell yourself what the fear is, you can usually figure out a way around it. Because a lot of our lives are nothing but workarounds and circumvention, especially if you are not from a position of power. And I want you to understand that fear is okay. Like, I am afraid of losing. I do not like it. I find it very unsettling. And if I fail at this next thing, it is going to be very, very public. Like, really public, man. And I am deeply afraid of what that's going to mean. I'm deeply afraid of, if I don't get this done, what does that do to the next person who wants to do this? If I am not successful, what does it say to that woman, to that girl, to that boy who thinks that maybe I can't do it because no one like me has done it? And so there's a real fear that by striving, I'm setting myself up and everyone else for failure. I'm not that important. And that's the thing I have to remind myself of. If I fail at this, which I'm not going to because everyone in Georgia is in this room, but on the off chance it happens, what I have to understand about fear is that fear is real, but it's also not fatal. And that acceptance that it's not fatal changes everything. Because you know if you can just get to that next moment, you have a whole other set of things you can fail at. This is just one of them. And that makes all the difference. Because part of owning power is being willing to deal with what power can give you, but also understanding what power can't grant you. And power can't grant you absolution, and it can't grant you perfection, and it is not a genie. But once you get that, then it's a lot easier to own it. Last one I'll tell you about, because there are 8 chapters. And this is a personal one about how I try to engage when I have power. My business partner and I, we started a number of companies together, and we, with our first company, had 5 rules. And our first rule was we don't deal with, I say jerks in the book, but that was not the word we wrote down. Because we just decided, we both worked in lots of different industries. I'd been a tax attorney and she'd been in real estate. And we're like, we are too old, because we were like 35 and we were very young. But we are too old to deal with jerks anymore. We are not going to do it. And we had a rule that if we both decided, we would fire clients, because we just weren't going to do that. It was too much time out of our lives. And so I went through that, and we actually ended up firing a couple of clients over time. But one of the revelations I had during my time was that sometimes I was the jerk. Part of power is knowing when you are a jerk. And it's being willing to investigate how you're dealing with what you now have. Because sometimes that power is grand and omnipresent, and you can tell people what they can have and what they can't have, and sometimes your power is being the person who opens the door. But if you're the person who can decide someone has to stay outside, that's a lot of power. If you have any position where you can deny access or opportunity, be it whether somebody gets a drink or someone gets a promotion, it's easy to get drunk on that power. It is easy to get comfortable with it because you remember when you didn't have it, and now you cling to it so much that you're never going to let anyone else touch it. Like a really good pair of shoes. You are not going to share it. And the thing is, you have to work hard not to be the jerk. And if you don't know if you're the jerk, you probably are. And one of the things I've compelled myself to do over and over again whenever I get into positions of power is to ask those who have less power than I have, how am I doing? It's why I want to make sure I say thank you to the person at the door and the person cleaning up the space, the people who seem to have the least amount of power, because the reality is sometimes the being a jerk is aggressive and intentional, and sometimes it's a benign neglect that is so much more painful. Because for that person, they don't think they can ever have anything else because they're being dismissed by so many people. And one of the joys and opportunities of leadership is that you can not just get in the door yourself, but you can prop it open and usher other people in. That's what we want to do. As I said, I grew up without a lot of power. I grew up in a space where we were not expected to do much. My mom and dad were so intentional about raising us to believe in our capacity for everything. They forgot to tell us that wasn't true. But they raised 6 children who do completely different things. My older sister Andrea is a cultural anthropologist, and she's a tenured professor and now the VP of diversity at her college. My sister Leslie is the first Black woman to be a federal judge in the state of Georgia. My brother Richard, who also has a learning disability, graduated from Payne College in Augusta and now works as a social, yes. He's a social worker who works with foster care children and homeless youth. My little sister Janine has a PhD in molecular systematics and evolutionary biology. We do not know what she does. We're just very impressed and a little afraid. And then there's my brother Walter. Walter is the fifth of the six of us. He's older than Janine and younger than Richard. And I've talked about Walter a lot because Walter is a brilliant man. Went to Morehouse College, but dropped out because he is a drug addict. And he has been fighting his addiction now for decades. And it wasn't until he was incarcerated for the first time, got his first felony, that we discovered that Walter not only is a heroin addict, he's bipolar. And that likely he has been bipolar since he was 15 or 16 years old. That when he started to get in trouble in school, even though he had this brilliant mind, he was also very belligerent and had mood swings. And what we understand now is he was probably going through early onset. And Walter's now been to prison twice. But I talk about Walter with the same pride that I have for my brothers and sisters, because Walter is also someone who is learning to own his power. Because he has the power to change his life. He has the power to fight every single day against an insidious mental illness that can never be cured but can only be managed. And to fight against a substance abuse addiction that can never be cured but can only be managed. And there is something profound to me when I get a text message from my brother Walter, who's telling me about how he's getting through today and what he's going to do on this day to make himself and those around him stronger. How he's trying to repair his relationship with his daughter and with my parents and with his siblings. Because power isn't just about owning and being in charge. Power is about controlling how you engage the world you're a part of. And as proud as I am of my lawyer sister, who's a judge, I am proud of my ex-con brother, who is not going back. And if we understand real leadership and real power, we know that that's the kind of world we want to live. Any questions? Seriously. Okay, you guys can talk up here. There are really bright lights. You guys look wonderful, but you're all in this kind of half shadow, so.
That's why we look wonderful.
There you go.
So thank you so much for coming to Athens again. To see you. Thanks a lot. You can hear me, right?
I can hear you. And I'll repeat questions.
So I wanted to ask you, as a business entrepreneur and also as a legislator, do you have any advice for Athens on what we can do to create some more diverse jobs other than working at the university or a public school teacher or, you know, a service industry type work?
Sure. I mean, there's this woman running for governor who has a lot of ideas, but no, here's very sincere. One is that creating a diverse economy has to require intentionality, but it also has to meet people where they are. One of the things I think we should be thinking about more frequently is how we use advanced energy. Georgia is one of the few states that has hydro, biomass, wind, and solar. There are jobs that are embedded in those opportunities that we haven't built out, and those are jobs that go from construction to coding. So you don't have to have a higher degree to do it. But it's also thinking about investment in entrepreneurs, and not just those who have high-tech ideas, but the idea of Main Street businesses. The baker, the butcher, the candlestick maker, the daycare center operator. Part of our responsibility and part of the opportunity for a place like Athens is Athens has more intellectual capital than a lot of places. But it also has one of the widest disparities because, again, there's this distance between those who sit at the top and those who do the service to make the top possible. And so I think the most effective way to build capacity is to actually spend more time talking to people who were never invited to places like this, who were never invited to Chamber of Commerce meetings. Go to them and ask them what they want. And I'm not doing, I know this wasn't a setup, but I'll talk about it anyway. There's this woman named, I call her Pam, because I didn't give her permission to tell her full story, but in South Macon, when I was first running, I went down there and met with her. She had two daughters, one who wanted to go into criminal justice, the other one who wanted to be a school teacher. And they had just both finished high school and they were on their way to college. But one of them, the teacher, was 8 months pregnant. And her mother was about to raise her grandchild while her daughter went off to college, because she said she knew that her daughter's opportunity would be thwarted if she didn't go to college. And she didn't want her daughter to make a decision that meant that she would never get out of South Macon. She wanted her to be able to come back if she wanted to, but she didn't want her to not have the chance to leave. And I sat there listening to Pam, and she told me about her daughters, and her daughters were sitting next to us, and they were just so lovely and so excited about what was going to happen for them. And then I asked Pam, I said, well, what do you want? And she looked at me like I was an idiot, because she was like, I just told you, I want my daughters to be successful, and do that. I said, no, but what do you want for you? What dream do you have for your life? And Pam looked at me and she said, no one has ever asked me that. She said, I've been a cashier at Piggly Wiggly for 20 years. And I assume I'm going to be a cashier at Piggly Wiggly for the next 20 years. I said, but what do you want? And she said, there's a building down the street. I would love to turn it into a daycare center. Because as much as I can raise my grandchild, there's so many young women who don't get this chance. Because no one's there to help them raise their children. And if I had that daycare center, I could also train them so they have a skill set. Because a lot of these girls aren't going to finish high school because they had a baby. She had this entire plan for how she could transform her community, but never shared it because no one ever asked. If Athens wants to cultivate capacity, you have to ask people what they want and give them space to believe that it's okay to tell you the answer.
Hi, Stacey. Thanks for coming to Athens. My name's Chad. I'm actually a board member of Athens for Everyone.
You guys were very nice and thank you.
Yeah, I hope you continue being so nice. I hope you're as nice to us. Speaking of that, I'm really happy about the fact that in a few months I'm gonna get to vote for governor for someone who has even more student loan debt than me.
I am an overachiever.
Yeah, I'm actually super excited about that. And on that point, there's this group of people who maybe you've heard of called the Dreamers. In Georgia, they are particularly affected by the Board of Regents policies 416 and 434, which ban undocumented residents of Georgia, undocumented students in Georgia, from attending our most prestigious colleges, and also bar them from paying in-state tuition. They have to pay out-of-state tuition. As hopeful governor, you will have power over appointing the new Board of Regents. I'm wondering how you will use that power to improve situation for the Dreamers in Georgia, and specifically in Athens, where we are less than a mile from the University of Georgia, which bars all undocumented students. I'm an alma mater there. I have student loan debt because of them, and I think a lot of the Dreamers I know deserve to be alma mater. I do.
Here's my bottom line. If you graduate from our high schools, you deserve to go to any of our colleges you can go to. Number two, we have to make certain that if you can go to those colleges, you can pay for it. I don't understand why Dreamers aren't entitled to the Hope Scholarship. If you can get the GPA, you should be able to get scholarships. And number three is, yes, one of the powers of the governor is the appointment of the Board of Regents. And I intend to appoint a Board of Regents that actually reflects the composition of Georgia.
Thank you for your response. I look forward to voting for you.
Hi, Stacey.
Hi.
My name's Evie. I'm a local teen from the county over.
Which county?
Overport. It's a really rural county, and
Oh, I've been there.
so you know.
You have a nice park there.
But as you know, it's very rural, and therefore there are some issues facing that the LGBTQ community will face there. So I want to know, as governor, because obviously I can't vote for you, but my mother, who I'm here with, can. And she's very excited too. So I was wondering, as governor, what will you put forth towards the LGBTQ community? Like, how will you help us out? Because I am a queer youth, and I would like to know, like, what people who are moving up that have power are going to do for us.
Absolutely. So a few things. One, if you go to my website, there's actually a whole comprehensive list of things, but I'll talk about the top lines. One, there will be no, despite the misreading of the terribly flawed decision from yesterday from Masterpiece Baker, it is, okay, I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to avoid doing what I would normally do, which is explain why it's both flawed and not as bad as people think. But it is a problem. But I will never sign a law that allows for religious discrimination. But that's a defensive posture. What we have to have is proactive legislation that actually expands civil rights to make certain they include the LGBTQ community writ large. But we also have to have training in our schools. We have to, when I talk about changing the composition of the Board of Regents, the governor also appoints the school board, the state school board. And our schools have, I think, again, a policy of benign neglect for communities that are not considered normative. And that is wrong. And we have to have more constant conversations and better training for those who are in our schools, because as a teenager, you shouldn't have to wait to be an adult to be treated as a human. I got you. Thank you. Yes, sir.
There have been many movements in this country to ensure that everyone has economic independence, like movements like the federal jobs guarantee and the fight for 15, that would give everyone who wants a job guaranteed by the government, as well as a living wage to go with that job so they can have economic independence. What is your stance on that? What would you do as governor to ensure that everyone who wants a job has a job and also has one at a wage with which they can live?
So I think that the conversation about a federal jobs guarantee, there are two bills that are moving. One by Senator Cory Booker, another by Senator Bernie Sanders. I think both are very interesting, and I want to see how they play out. I will say that I am both idealistic but also a pragmatist. And I think within the state of Georgia, there are some very clear things we can do. One is an earned income tax credit that recognizes an expanded definition of the term work. Because not everyone has to go somewhere to be a worker. Thank you. You can actually clap loud for that one. And the importance of an EITC that is, especially one that's coupled to the federal EITC, is that you can raise wages without changing the minimum wage in Georgia. Because part of the challenge with the minimum wage in Georgia and the fight for 15, and I think the fight for 15 is noble and right, but we also have counties that could not sustain a $15 minimum wage. And it is disingenuous to argue or to say that you're going to create something that can't actually come into fruition, but there's no reason you can't solve the problem anyway. And so I do believe that we have to invest in economic mobility plans, including an EITC, child care credits, because the three most expensive things are taking care of yourself, being healthy, and taking care of your kids. If we expand Medicaid in the state of Georgia, if we put in place a workers' tax credit so that if you work, you do not fall below the poverty line in our state, because that's an abomination. And if we put in place child care tax credits, basically a scholarship, so that you don't go into college debt for a 2-year-old, those are ways to put money back into the pockets of workers and back into the pockets of residents. I think we do have to think long-term about economic security opportunities. Not only am I paying attention to what is being done by Senator Sanders and Senator Booker, but my good friend Mayor Tubbs in Stockton is undertaking an economic security experiment that I think is going to be really interesting, that we should pay attention to. And my intention as governor is to make certain we're looking across not only the country, but around the world to find the best opportunities to make certain that no one falls below the poverty line in the state of Georgia ever again.
Okay, I have a question about books, actually.
Please. the book is on?
Yeah.
Okay.
The reader in me can't resist. So I don't know if you still have time to read for pleasure that often nowadays, but if you do, what are some things you've read in the last year or so that have stuck with you? Fiction, nonfiction, any genre at all?
Sure. So I do read. I read a lot. So actually, I was on vacation last week, so I actually reread a number of Nora Roberts novels because I love her. I adore Colson Whitehead. I think he is one of the best writers. And so I actually had not gotten a chance to read Underground Railroad, so I'm reading that. And then I really do like nonfiction, and so I am reading the biography of Grant by David McCullough.
My name is Jill, and I have a 12-year-old son on the autism spectrum. And this last year was fairly scary with all the changes proposed to healthcare in general. And I've been trying to push myself to be a leader on behalf of my son and advocate. And I organized 2 rallies here in Athens against the Medicaid changes. I wonder, from your book, what advice do you have for those of us who are so limited in capacity, who are strapped with our time and energy to make a difference and trying to improve the situation for children with special needs?
Absolutely. So first of all, you don't get to sit down. So first I want to say thank you. Because here's the thing. Not everyone's going to run for a higher office. Not everyone's going to run for anything. But part of making a difference is finding your corner of the world and owning it. And if your corner of the world is addressing the conversation of autism in the in the Clark County public school system, then that's your space. And the way, you guys are awesome at clapping, but you give up too fast. Part of it is, and this is what I pride myself on, part of being a leader is finding people who can replicate yourself. So you don't have to be the one doing everything. And one of the joys of democracy and one of the joys of being in a free society, as long as it lasts. Sorry, I was on Twitter before I came out here. But part of that is that you're not alone. You're not the only person for whom this is an issue. And so part of leadership is understanding your limitations, but finding people who have different limitations. And if you band yourselves together, then you've got an army. And my parents tried to fix Mississippi with 6 children and Kool-Aid. It was amazing. But what they taught me was that you're not going to win every battle, but part of it is showing up so that people know that they can show up too. And you literally are speaking for those who do not have the chance to speak for themselves. And you're not the only one, because it's not just the children you're speaking for, it's those parents who've just been numbed by the terrible treatment that they find and by the inability to articulate their needs for the kids in the school system and advocate for them and with their medical needs. And so part of what I would encourage you to do, and you're probably already doing this, you just don't realize it, is you're not responsible for fixing everything. You're responsible for doing something. And if you can create a space for other women and other men and other children to do it with you, then that is the kind of leadership that you need, because that's how you get it done.
getting involved at like the local level and helping to promote progressive culture at like high school. How would you recommend doing that?
So there's this book I wrote called Minority. So, I'm very serious here, and this goes to your question as well. Part of what I talk about in the book is that we often get overwhelmed by our goals because they just seem so big. And by the time you finish listing them, you're like, I'm tired, I'm gonna watch TV. I'm gonna watch Stranger Things. But here's what I do. So I tell the story in the book. So I've had 2 terrible boyfriends. One I put in prison in a book, and the other one, I'm not joking, and it was based on his dissertation. It was fun. I'm mildly vengeful. But the other one, he broke up with me my freshman year of college, sophomore year. Anyway, I was very angry, and I went to the college lab, the computer lab, and I wrote a spreadsheet that listed out all of my ambitions until I was 68 years old. Do not try that at home. But why this matters is that that ambition spreadsheet helped me deconstruct what I wanted and how I planned to get there. And so for you, and for anyone who's trying to figure out what to do, part of it is that we get in our own heads and we get overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of what we want. Even if it doesn't seem that big when we say it, when we try to figure out how to do it, it collapses in on itself, and then you just don't know how to do it. Part of what I walk you through in the book is how to articulate what you want, figure out what you've got. There's a whole section on power mapping. Power mapping, it comes out of the social justice space. It's basically how do you figure out how to make people do what you want them to do. I've adapted it for personal use, where I figure out, okay, here's the thing I want to get to, who is in my way, and who can get me there. And what you realize is that no matter how complicated, no matter what dimension your dreams take or your goals take, there's somebody you know who can help you get there. There's somebody that you're going to find online or that you have to go to school with who shares your ideas and wants. Are you literally fixing that while you're... No, it's good. I'm just amazed that you can solve a Rubik's Cube while making icons. I can only solve it by moving the stickers, okay? I'm very impressed. No, you should not be embarrassed at all. I am just very impressed right now. And I'm about to have you come up on stage with me. But anyway, so my point being, after you're done with that, buy my book. But the whole point of the book, and the exercises that are in the book are actually also online so that you can download them and see what it looks like. But the most important thing about power, about leadership, about setting things up is don't let yourself get confused by the magnitude. Focus on your meaning and on your mission. And that can be made really small. I mean, I'm running for governor, and I didn't think about that at first. I only wanted to be mayor before. When I was 18, I was going to be the mayor of Atlanta. But what I realized is, no, I didn't want that job. I wanted the next one. But I then set out to figure out how to get there. And it's just that pedestrian. That part of it is, I don't want to seem overly simplistic, but it is about letting yourself break down the pieces, figure out who's got the power that you need to borrow or take, and knitting it together, but writing it down helps make it possible. And so whether you're in high school or whether you are trying to fix America, it's doable. Okay, go ahead and finish.
Oh.
I don't put you on the spot. If you want to go in the back and finish it, but okay, now you're just showing off.
Sorry, this usually takes about like 10 seconds.
No, you're making me feel better as a human, so take.
I'm going to be boring by comparison. I don't have to.
I'm boring by comparison. Literally, you guys didn't see it. Like, he was moving his hands. I'm like, you were staring in my eyes. How are you doing that? Okay, yes.
Hi, my name is Adam. I teach middle school in Commerce, and thank you for your service in the legislature. Thank you for running for office. As you know, for the past 10 years, with the past 10 budgets, teachers have gotten a pay raise once. Over the past 16 years, if you track for inflation, we are 14% poorer than we were 15 years ago. Now that's doubly bad, right? It's bad for us and our families, but also what I've learned most people don't know is that the state funding formula for schools is undergirded by the state salary. So when we don't get a raise, the schools don't get a raise.
Yep.
So I've learned that reaction right there is what I get from people, that we don't even know that's a problem. What do you as a governor propose? What legislation would you push and would you sign that would fix that? Indexing salaries to inflation? Would it be just messing with the numbers so that we get more dedicated funding for counselors? Things like that? What do you propose that we do about it?
I think there's a few things. One is that we have to actually acknowledge that it costs more to educate certain kids. If you are a poor child, if you're rural, if you speak English as a second language, if you have special needs, those are all more expensive educational pathways. We have a formula that does not recognize it. Yeah, you can clap again. We have a funding formula that is grounded in a Georgia of 40 years ago. A Georgia that wasn't this complex, a Georgia that was not this diverse, and a Georgia that was not this populated. And those are all problems that can only be solved by actually fixing the formula. We have not fixed the formula because some people got mad. Governor Deal actually had well, every governor has a commission on the formula. But the last commission on the formula acknowledged this problem. The challenge was nobody wanted to be responsible for saying it's going to cost more money to educate our children. I will say that, because I can do math. But some major things are we have to actually put our paraprofessionals on a salary schedule, because one of the things that happens is they get left behind immediately. We have to make up the difference and actually treat teachers and educators as professionals. And that means investing in special needs educators who are often given short shrift and given way too much responsibility with way too little support. But it's also some financial decisions. I personally do not believe that we should divert $100 million a year to pay for private school education for wealthy families. That $100 million is a 2% pay increase. And so those are solvable problems, but you have to have a governor, one, willing to say that things cost money, and two, to make the priorities paying for the things that actually cost money. Because if we invest in education, the return on investment is that we lower our recidivism rate, we lower our incarceration rate, we lower our public welfare costs. If we do the right thing in education, we solve all of those problems. Okay, so I see you, and I see you, timidity. Come on up. Okay, you two have the last two questions, because Rachel is telling me I have to sit down, because apparently every one of you bought a book, and I've got to go home this week. Okay, so make it profound and interesting, and what gimmick do you have?
I'm Peggy, and I am from a deep, deep red county.
Okay.
Barrow County.
That is true. Okay, you're good. You go ahead. Go ahead.
And what I want to know is your thoughts on getting the vote out, because the county that I am, when I let people know I'm a Democrat, first off they look at me like I have a disease, and I'm contagious. So I'm curious as to how to get the vote out, because I think there are lots of Democrats that are hiding under rocks.
Yeah.
So
Look, I've said there are two ways I answer that question. One is that Georgia's not a red state. We're just blue and confused. But the other reality is we have to have candidates who make it safe to be a Democrat, because part of the confusion is we don't like people taking our bumper stickers off our car and pulling up our yard signs, flipping us off in church. Like, those are problematic things. It makes you feel bad about yourself as a person. And we've forgotten that we're right, that our issues and our values are the right ones. But my parents, my mom and dad, I told you, shipyard worker, my mom's a librarian, they decided they weren't poor enough, so they became Methodist ministers. And that's what brought us to Georgia. And so we came to Georgia, they went to Emory to get their master's in divinity, they moved back to Mississippi, I stayed in Georgia. But the reason I talk about that is that my parents' job is to save souls. And they spend a lot of time out there talking to people. But you know, in church, you have this moment where the choir claps and the choir says amen. The problem with Democrats is that we only say amen to each other. The Republicans proselytize. They go out and tell everyone else you're going to hell unless you agree with us. We tell each other, yay, we're all going to heaven together. And the problem with that is if you're only talking to yourselves, nobody else can hear you. That's why we lose. We lose because we don't talk to other folks. And what I watch my parents do, what I know we can do, is my parents go out. My mom's saying was, meet people where they are, not where you want them to be. We want to already be the winner. That's not the way it works. We only win when we get other people to do the work with us. And it's to scale the conversation. It's about getting out there. It is about finding people who are hiding under rocks because they're waiting for someone to come find them. They may say things to you, and when you're in the grocery store, they may make a joke. It's an opening. They're asking you to ask them to come on board. But the way we win this election, the way we win every election, is by acknowledging that there are more of us than there are of them. There are more of us who believe that education should be the province of every child and your zip code should not matter. Most of the rural hospitals shutting down are in Republican areas. They don't want to die. They want health care. But they don't have anyone willing to speak up for them. So the way we win is by doing what this campaign has done from the very beginning. And technically, this is not a campaign event, so when I say this campaign, I am not using any campaign resources to make this statement. But what I have done in my other job is that we have organized people around the state of Georgia, including in Barrow County. But we need more of us to do that work because they are going to do it. They are terrified. When's the last time a Republican nominee or Republican wannabe nominee said that they were the best person to beat the Democrat? That's Casey Cagle's argument. He shouldn't care about me. But they think there might be an issue, and if you don't believe it, look at the Twitter feed from the RGA. They can't stand me. But it's because they know that we're right, and they know we can win. We just have to believe it's so. We have to believe it's so. And if you want to help, you should go to StaceyAbrams.com and sign up. We got you. Okay, yes ma'am.
Hi, my name is Sam. I am a emergency room social worker here in the state of Georgia. One of the biggest populations that I'm seeing come through the emergency room I work in is those who are struggling with addiction, specifically with opioids. And as I see more patients, I see less resources. And my favorite poet taught me that the worst thing about having nothing is having nothing to give. So what are your plans as governor to not only increase the resources for those who struggle with any addiction, but specifically opioids, as well as the policy changes to try to curb the epidemic itself?
Sure. So I do talk about opioid addiction, but I think we have to have a broader conversation because Georgia has faced a drug epidemic for decades. And we have families that have been ravaged by it, not only by lack of access to services, but by incarceration. And the difference right now in the opioid crisis is that incarceration has not been the response, but all of these families are facing the same challenges. And so for me, it is about having a broad conversation because we can't leave anyone behind on this. As I discussed with my brother, he could have gotten help if he had access to treatment. Because a lot of folks who have substance abuse issues have dual diagnosis. And you should not be incarcerated when treatment is the solution. The answer for Georgia, and my answer on almost every conversation related to access to services, is if we expand Medicaid in the state of Georgia, we can create a substance abuse treatment network that is unparalleled. We forfeit $8 million a day by refusing to expand Medicaid. And you and I both know that $8 million invested in the state of Georgia every day in providing access to health care changes this state forever. That is what we have to do as an
you all to be able to meet Stacey. So Stacey will be signing books over here. Please form an organized line as best as you can. Get your phones out, get your books out. We're going to try to get you all to the signing line. Please be as brief as possible to all your neighbors to meet Stacey. And thank you for coming to this event.
I'm not quite sure where he is. There he is. There's the old school routine. You put your flap in. Yeah. Throw your flap in there, you're done. She's not doing it. Quite proud of her. And I have no idea what I've touched by touching your screen. So there's no telling. I might have edited the whole thing.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Can you grab me that one last thing and I will not bother you?